JRPGs and I definitely have a love-hate relationship. I love how much depth they can have, and even though the stories can be silly, I do like how over the top they are. I also like turn-based combat and how engaging the levelling up systems can be. However, I wouldn't say I'm a big JRPG fan, mainly because most JRPGs have embarrassing problems when it comes to basic gameplay. The majority of them seem to stick to certain RPG traditions even if it doesn't make for a fun gaming experience, such as stiff controls, horrible saving and random battles. It normally means I rarely complete JRPGs, as it's hard for me to put up with gameplay issues that wouldn't be a problem in any other well-made game. It's why I wasn't sure what I was going to get when I started playing Pandora's Tower on the Wii. Pandora's Tower was part of Operation Rainfall, which involved JRPG fans trying to get free Wii games to be released in America. Living in the UK, I wasn't really interested in Operation Rainfall, but I did recently pick up Pandora's Tower, as I saw the special edition in a shop for cheap. So, did Pandora's Towers deserve to be eventually released in the US, and does it suffer from the same problems that a lot of other JRPGs suffer from? Let's find out. The story starts with some guy called Aaron fleeing from a city with a young game called Elena. Elena has been cursed, which is slowly turning her into some sort of monster. The only way to break the curse is by feeding her Master Flesh. Master Flesh comes from 3 different masters who reside in 13 different towers by a large chasm called the Skull. Something I like about the story is that at the beginning you're just thrown into what's going on and are only given the basic details. However, throughout the game you're given more details either by conversation, reading books or flashbacks. It means the story, while a relatively simple one, builds over the course of the game and you can go as deep as you like with it. It does mean at first you might find yourself completely uninterested in what's going on due to how little context you have, but it gets better the more you play. The actual story itself though has some problems. The focus is the relationship of Aaron and Elena, but it's hard to get that invested in their relationship for a couple of reasons. The first is how Aaron looks. I'm sorry, but it's hard to like a character who looks as stupid as he does. He's supposed to be a guy, but all I see is a girl because of his hair. The second reason is Elena's voice actor. You have to listen to Elena talk a lot in this game, and it becomes a chore due to just how annoying her voice is. Overall though, I do like the story as it centres around 2 people in this way, but their relationship isn't really that interesting, so the story is a bit flat. The core gameplay revolves around sword combat and using the chain. The combat comes down to using 2 buttons, the attack button and the block button. You can also use a charged attack by holding down the attack button and perform a roll by pressing the stick while using the block. The combat definitely feels a bit basic, as every fight comes down to slashing the enemy, blocking their attacks or avoiding it, and then just slashing them again. It can be enjoyable with just how bare bones it is, but it isn't very satisfying killing any enemies. This isn't helped by the fact that some enemies will take a large amount of damage before dying, which can make certain battles quite tedious. The combat isn't broken though and can be fun, but don't expect combat mechanics to go as deep as a game such as God of War. Something I did appreciate though is that the game can be controlled using either the Wiimote and Nunchuck or the classic controller. I naturally use the classic controller as it removes any flailing you would usually have to do. The second part of the core gameplay is the chain. The chain can be used during combat, to solve puzzles and to scale up walls. You will be using the chain a lot in this game as it's the only proper item in this game to solve puzzles with. It's like if there was a Zelda game which instead of having multiple items for each dungeon, there was only one item for the whole game. While this sounds like a terrible idea, in this game's defense each area does use the chain in a different way, such as in one area you have to use a chain to block off fence, and in another area you have to create grappling points from rocks. I do like using the chain, but the mechanic feels a bit rough around the edges. There is a lot of solid puzzles in this game, but sometimes it feels a bit forced, such as having to pull on elevator switches to go up and down. Also, it can be a bit unclear on the range of your chain and what exactly you can and can't use your chain on. Saying that, it is a cool gimmick and can be fun to use. The game is split into 13 separate towers. You go to one of the towers, you reach the top of it, defeat the master, give the master flesh to Elena for her to eat, and you move on to the next tower. To enter the door where the master is, you have to track down and destroy the chain links that are scattered throughout the tower. The towers do feel like dungeons from the Zelda games as you solve puzzles, defeat enemies, and there's a boss at the end of each one. The towers do feel like a more stripped down version of the dungeons from Zelda due to the lack of items and the lack of keys, but they are still fun to play. The towers have a more streamlined feel to them as there is only one way to get through them, but the design of the towers makes them feel non-linear. It's also cool as once you get through the first 5 towers, the next 5 all unlock at the same time, meaning you can beat them in whatever order you choose. It's disappointing though as towers 5 to 10 have the exact same theme and style as the first 5 towers. It does make sense as each tower can be beaten in half an hour and they probably want to revisit some of the themes they use, but the fact that they look exactly the same and most of the puzzles are repeated does make these towers feel a bit like padding. A major part of this game is the beast flesh you find in the towers, and making sure Elena doesn't turn into a monster. In the bottom left corner of the screen is a meter that slowly ticks down. This meter represents how much time you have until Elena is completely transformed. If she fully transforms, you get a game over. To restore the meter you can either give her master flesh or give her other flesh that you find when defeating enemies in the towers. I have to say that this was a terrible idea. It essentially means you always have a timer, which completely goes against the exploration and puzzle solving aspects of the towers. If you get stuck on a certain section, then there's a good chance that you have to leave the tower to go give Elena some more flesh and then have to climb all the way back up to that spot. It doesn't really break the game though, as when you're not stuck it doesn't get in the way, and the towers are designed with shortcuts so you can return to Elena once you reach certain checkpoints. It does still bring the game down though, as it makes being stuck a lot more frustrating than it needs to be, as you feel like you're being rushed. I almost gave up playing this game because in the 4th tower none of the enemies drop beast flesh, and you can't get beast flesh from any tower you've already beaten, meaning I had to load up an old save and play the whole tower again because my meter got too low. I want to repeat that this feature doesn't ruin the game, it's just the game would have been vastly improved if you didn't have to deal with this annoying mechanic from time to time. The levelling up system is very bare bones in this game. You gain experience from killing enemies, and once you level up, your stats improve. There's nothing more to it than that, so you probably won't even pay attention to the levelling up system. You can customise yourself though in other ways with the items and the equipment. When exploring the towers you will find items that can be used to make better items like medicine and armour, or can be used to level up your weapons. It means that improving yourself involves fully exploring the towers, which I think works really well. You actually spend a lot of the time managing your items, as you're given a limited inventory space, so you have to decide what to leave and take with you. Something I'm not a fan of is the way you equip weapons and armour. You have a limited grid space in which you have to place items you want to equip, so you have to be organised to get the most out of the space and decide which items you want to use the most. It seems like an unnecessary way of doing things, and I would have preferred a more traditional system. You also find gifts that you can give to Elena, which improves your relationship with her. It's a nice little way of trying to get the player involved with Aaron's and Elaine's relationship, but the only thing it really boils down to is what ending you can get. While not every game on the Wii looks bad, Pandora's Tower is a game that really would have benefited by being on a HD console. You can tell a lot of effort went into the graphics and the style of the game, but everything here just looks grainy. As I have the limited edition of the game, I also have the art book for it, and the artwork in there looks great. It doesn't mean this is an ugly game, but if it was released on a more powerful console, then this could have been an amazing looking game. The bosses seem to be a bit misguided. I like their designs and each boss does feel unique. I wouldn't say they're good though, as the strategy for each one is very easy to figure out. Once you do know the strategy for beating them, it then becomes a long grind to get the health down to 0, as the bosses aren't that hard, they just have very long health bars. You can see they wanted to have old school kind of bosses, but unfortunately most of the boss battles are just a bit too repetitive to be enjoyable. Pandora's Towers is a game that you can get a lot of enjoyment out of. I spent most of the review time complaining about its flaws, as it's very easy to pick apart. It isn't a solid game as it's too rough around the edges, but overall I did like it. The Zelda-esque towers were well designed, the story, well nothing special, does do things a bit differently, and while the core mechanics aren't perfect, they do work well enough. If you want something a bit different from other JRPGs, then I say check it out, even if it isn't an amazing game. My score is 7.5 out of 10. While Pandora's Towers is littered with flaws, they ultimately don't get in the way for what is a pretty good gaming experience.